Yo, what's up guys? My name is Cartoons and welcome to another video. In this one, I'm going to be giving my first impressions for the Frost Mage spec in Legion. It is currently March 10th, 2016, and I feel like I have a pretty solid understanding of how the developers have approached this class. However, I don't necessarily feel that there is a solid direction with the class, and I feel that compared to other classes, the other classes have really been a solid development process. I'm really impressed with the Demon Hunter. I think that there's a lot of different classes out there that look really great. I think that there's some tuning obviously, and Frost Mage is definitely one of them that I want to talk about, especially since it's my main class. It's what I'm passionate about, and I feel that I have a pretty solid way to, approach my critiques since I have, been playing it for such a long time. So yesterday, which was Wednesday, the first day it came out, I played with Volkazar, who is another mage that has been rank 1 multiple expansions. And we sat in Duratar for like 3 hours and talked about the class and the different specs available and, how we could play the class in multiple ways. And we came down to 3 specs with it. Okay, so 3 different specs that kind of is a solid way or a solid, synergistic way that the developers have given us to play the class. And I just don't really quite understand why I would play Frost over playing Arcane and Fire based off of these 3 specs. So I'm going to explain these 3 specs really quick and then give my, solid revisions and how this can be changed. So the first spec is called Frostbolt spec. It's called Lonely Winter, Unstable Magic, Deep Shatter, and Ice Form. And those 4 talents basically supplement your frost damage or your frostbolt damage. So you would sit there and cast and, direct, like just straight cast frostbolt, and that's how you do your damage, right? And then there's Iceland spec, which is Lonely Winter, Frozen Touch, Frostbomb, Comet Storm. Those are basically revolved around instant cast and rotating your Fingers of Frost procs and just doing the most damage possible with Ice Lance only, okay? Or Comet Storm and setting up with Frostbomb and just doing all of the damage with your Icy Veins in that small window of time. And the third out of 3 specs is called the AoE spec, and I feel like this is definitely the weakest of the 3 because the AoE spec is revolved around taking your AoE Cone of Cold and your Blizzards and your Frozen Orbs and just doing as much damage as you can in AoE fashion. However, I feel like this definitely doesn't work because none of the AoE abilities are really tuned to do any damage. Like, there's so many different ways that your artifact, whether, it increases your Cone of Cold and your Frozen Orb damage, like this one right here. And overall, I really just don't quite understand the point of playing with this AoE spec compared to Fire, especially with Phoenix's Flames and Fire, where you're able to Pyroblast multiple targets on a consistent basis. I just really don't understand how Frost is supposed to be an AoE spec when it's always been this whole stun a target or Nova a target and do a huge amount of damage in a small amount of time with your cooldowns up, and then work around that. I don't really see this AoE spec being a thing unless it's supposed to be straight for PvE. And even then, I just don't understand why you would pick that over Fire anyways. I'm not really quite sure. So with all that being said, my main grievances are the fact that there's 2 of them. So the fact that Deep Freeze was removed. I feel like Deep Freeze was probably the most iconic spell for Frost and was the reason why you would play Frost over Arcane, for example, because the only reason Arcane players play Arcane is the fact that they trade off Deep Freeze in order to do more damage and also stand still. Now with this Frostbolt spec, imagine, okay, you don't have Deep Freeze, so you have to stand there and an assault, you have to stand there and not be targeted and do a large amount of damage while casting. What does that sound like? Sounds like Arcane. And the reason why I just don't see that working is because Arcane 1 does more damage, and 2, Frostbolt spec just doesn't really, it just doesn't feel satisfying to stand there and cast, especially whenever you can be interrupted. You can be stunned, you can be a lot of things, and I understand that there's Ice Form, which makes you immune to stun, but still, that's a small amount of time. And elsewhere you're just doing no damage. Again, you could just play Arcane and do a way more amount of damage. However, I can see how this spec can kind of work if you had Deep Freeze, and I understand that the main reason for Deep Freeze being removed is the fact that from what I understand, just based off of talking to developers, is that they didn't quite like the whole Deep Freeze into polymorph mechanic that was so common in Warlords of Draenor. That's pretty much how Frost Mages work. You would blink or Blazing Speed into a Deep Freeze on a healer, and then you would sheep them, and your teammates would cover the other 2 so you could get that sheep off, and then you would have CC on the healer, and then you could kill someone. That's how it worked, right? So that wasn't really an appreciated mechanic in the game, and that's why it was probably removed. Now I don't necessarily agree with that, and I feel that Deep Freeze was such an iconic spell that it made mages have a small amount of time where they had the advantage. And without that advantage, I've noticed just by PvPing with this, multiple specs, that like I really have no clear indication of when I'm supposed to do damage aside from just having Icy Veins up. And even then, like, that's just not enough. And that brings me into my next point, is that Icy Veins, while it is very powerful, it's a very, very, very long cooldown. And if you get disrupted in any sort of way in that short amount of time that you have Icy Veins for the increased 100% damage and 30% haste, like without that, like, you're nothing. Like, you don't do anything that's really substantial compared to another class, like any kind of melee class right now. For example, any other melee class can like survive better. They have better mobility. They have they do way more damage, obviously. And I just don't necessarily see how Frost is supposed to stand up to that in terms of like kiting and having the short amount of windows where they can do this kind of damage. And my recommendation for changing Icy Veins is making it a 1 minute cooldown and giving it an 8 to 12 second duration as opposed to 20 second duration and a 3 minute cooldown. Now this would really synergize well with Ice Form, because Ice Form is a 45 second cooldown. It lasts for 12 seconds and it kind of is the same type of ability. It gives you a steroid which increases your damage from Frostbolt, and then it grants you an immunity. Kind of the same thing. It's a little bit of utility and a lot more damage, which is the exact same thing of Icy Veins, except for Icy Veins has a 3 minute cooldown. And another case study why a 3 minute cooldown doesn't work well is because look at like Beast Mastery, for example, in Warlords of Draenor, or look at Feral Druid. With Incarnation, Berserk, or Bestial Wrath, all of those had a high cooldown and they did a high amount of damage, yes, but if there was any disruption whatsoever on that player, it did not work at all. And I feel like, especially since Icy Veins is just dispellable, like straight up, you can just spell steal it, that makes the class very, very, very weak whenever they don't have the, they don't have the damage, and then also they can be just, simply disrupted without any problems whatsoever. So yes, I would say reducing the cooldown of Icy Veins makes the class have a little bit more identity. There's a little bit more understanding of what to do, but I still stand by my opinion, even with that lower Icy Veins cooldown, of having Deep Freeze in the game, because I need to have a clear understanding of when I'm supposed to do damage. And whether you want to either make deep frozen targets immune to polymorph or whatever to get that mechanic out of the game, I still feel like Deep Freeze on a kill target is extremely essential to playing the game how I want to. And that is a pretty, that like makes the class, that makes the class. I need that window. I need that understanding of like, okay, when my Deep Freeze comes up in 25 seconds, I'm going to do damage. And I get that same feeling from playing Havoc Demon Hunter right now. There's something called, I think, Chaos Nova or Chaos Wave or something. It's an AoE 5-second stun, and you get Metamorphosis if you take the talent, while you do that, which gives you a ton of damage. And basically how you play Demon Hunter is like you wait for that 30-second mark, just like you do with Frost Mage and Deep Freeze, or, in previous expansions. You wait for that 30 seconds, you stun them, you do a bunch of damage in that window, and that's like how you play the class. You can't do that with Frost Mage, and I feel like that's definitely a fault. I definitely would like to see Deep Freeze come back in the game. This is just my way to express my constructive criticism, and I hope that you take that to heart if any developers are watching this. And I really appreciate the Frost Mage spec, but I just don't quite see the direction that you would like me to play this class, because there's so many different ways that I could play Fire and Arcane and do better than Frost based off of the current spec, because the only point of taking Frost was usually like the Deep Freeze and the instant cast, synergizing together, right? Without those two identity steps in the class, there's really no point in playing Frost aside from getting a little bit more slows, which you can spam slow in an AoE manner as Arcane now, especially since like there's just so many ways. There's so many ways you could play a different class, or you could play the other specs that would do better than Frost right now. So anyways, I hope to see this developed in a little bit better way. I will definitely be making videos as it does, develop throughout the alpha and the beta stages of Legion. But yeah, hashtag bring Deep Freeze back, man. I would love to see that. But I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please be sure to leave a like on this video and subscribe. You can also check out my website for World of Warcraft guides if you would like to see a little bit more in-depth, comprehensive stuff. And I will definitely be releasing more videos on Legion as it comes out, doing more duels, doing more arenas. So definitely leave a comment if there's something specific you would like to see. And I hope you guys enjoyed the video. But that's it for me today, and I will see you all in the next one. Cartoons out.